Large parts of the city of Tshwane were without electricity because several massive pylons were damaged. That led to the cables falling onto the N4 highway. The city said from the very beginning this was probably due to vandalism, people attacking the pylons, stealing the metal and the cable from them. At the same time, there have also been claims that the pylons were not properly maintained. Around the country, you'll see attacks on infrastructure with cable theft literally everywhere. For example, Transnet now publishes every day the number of attacks on its infrastructure. They publish that every 24 hours. David Bruce is a crime expert and analyst. Dave, good afternoon to you. I was amazed to find out that Transnet does that, actually. We've become almost so used to this kind of attack on infrastructure, and yet there seems to have been such a big increase in attacks on our infrastructure over the last few years. Why has the number of these attacks grown so quickly?
Well, that's a good question. But broadly, it seems that what we're seeing in South Africa at the moment is some kind of intensification of various forms of what you could call organized criminality, which generally, have an economic dimension to them. So what we're seeing is various groups involved in a kind of type of illicit economy, which has become entrenched in South Africa.
One of the things we saw in Tshwane is, some people were saying, well, the problem really was a lack of maintenance on these pylons. And it can actually be quite difficult to know, can't it, if this is a lack of maintenance or if it was a deliberate attack on infrastructure. Unless you actually have footage, unless you can actually see it was deliberate, sometimes you can see that it was deliberate. And these things all run together. If someone's checking on a pylon every day, it's probably harder to then steal it.
Right. Well, you see it also then what one needs to throw into the mix. So on the one hand, we have the problem of effective maintenance. We've got crimes against infrastructure from external sources, but then we also have this problem of the complicity of employees in some cases. So in some cases where infrastructure is breaking down, it amounts to some type of what can be called internal sabotage of equipment. It might be what amounts to deliberate neglect or damage to infrastructure. And often then people involved in this kind of activity will be, benefiting from, repairs or, the economic contracts related to the repair of equipment in one way or another. So it's, the problem is multifaceted.
One of the things that's really vital is how the state responds, so how the police, how the criminal justice system responds. I sometimes think it's not responding at all. How do you assess the response?
Well, you see, the issue obviously seemed to start receiving more serious attention from government last year. It was referred to by President Ramaphosa in his State of the Nation address at the beginning of last year, and again in his follow-up speech to the budget vote last year. The Minister of Police, Bekitele, talked about task teams that they'd established in hotspots, including municipalities which were most affected by this type of problem. But subsequent to that, it hasn't become really very much clearer as to what government is doing in, for instance, his follow-up speech to President Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address earlier this year. The Minister of Police seemed to indicate that these task teams had shifted focus in some kind of way. There was a vague reference to multidisciplinary units, and it wasn't, clear that there was any, clear or coherent response to the problem that had been taking shape.
So, if there's no proper coherent response, and and you're a syndicate and you're getting away with it, you're just going to keep doing it. If you got away with taking electricity, if you got away with taking cable from a pylon in Tshwane, you're just going to do it again.
Right. So obviously one would hope for a more effective response from government and the police. And so, I mean, ultimately what that would need to amount to would be a systematic process of strengthening the police service, including improving standards of recruitment, improving the quality of training and so on. What you do also have happening at the moment, as illustrated in Pretoria, is forms of what you would call situational crime prevention or target hardening, where new types of infrastructure are being introduced, which are hopefully less susceptible to these kinds of crimes. So what you have in Pretoria is these monopoles being put in, and it's much more difficult to tamper with that kind of equipment than with the previous infrastructure, the previous pylons.
The problem is that you can't have an armed guard at every piece of infrastructure. I mean, you have people who, it's not infrastructure, but graveyards are very important to people, and you have people stealing tombstones because they're so difficult to protect. It's the same kind of problem. There's some parts of the country which are public. Everyone should be allowed to be there at almost any time of the day. Some of them are important transport nodes for people to walk through. You can't actually put an armed guard at every single pylon.
Right, excuse me. So, yeah, and of course, I mean, there are questions about better use of technology, closed-circuit television systems, and other types of monitoring equipment. The challenge is that, in turn, these types of equipment also require maintenance. They require effective management. One illustration of the potential problems with this type of equipment is, of course, the Thabo Bester saga, where it seems that during a critical point in, while the escape plan was being hatched, as far as I understand it, the television systems were turned off.
It seems, I mean, so many people seem to get away with it. It seems the problem's going to get worse. Is there a way to disrupt the economics of it? And I know, for example, there's a ban on the sale of scrap copper or a ban on the export of scrap copper. That's been tried in other countries where the same thing happens. But is there any other way to disrupt the economics of it that doesn't require such a comprehensive, big kind of criminal justice response?
Well, it's not clear to me that there is. I think, the issue of the ban on sale of copper cable or ferrous metals of that kind is itself highly controversial and, is often heavily contested by role players in the industry on the basis of its kind of economic impact. So it's I haven't seen anyone putting forward quick fix solutions of that kind which would readily address the problem.
David Bruce, thank you. The crime expert and analyst, do appreciate the time, of course.